and welcome to today's webinar on moving from initial use of AI to rolling out across an enterprise. We're going to be getting started in just a couple of minutes. I'm just going to give everyone 30 seconds or so to trickle in. Just whilst we are waiting, I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded and we'll be sharing the on-demand link with you tomorrow, so you can rewatch this or share it with your team as you need to. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A section in the webinar menu to submit them as we go. We have apportioned 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to go through those questions, but if we don't get through to them all, we will be following up via mail afterwards anyway. So please do get your questions in, whether LEGALFLY or AI related. More than happy to answer them. So my name is Harry. I am a senior legal engineer at LEGALFLY, and I am today joined by Jeroen, one of our senior key account managers. Between us, we have now supported many client onboardings. My long-suffering colleague Jeroen, with many different clients across many different time zones, both early and late. And so what we are talking about today, what we're going through, is very much based on what we've seen work for real teams. Initially, we're going to be focusing on life after a successful pilot / initial implementation of enterprise AI. We're then going to move into a demonstration and then finally with a Q&A. The goal today is really to give you an idea of what you need in place for each of those stages. So for just getting started, building standards, and then rolling out across the entire team or even the organization, so that you really understand how you can move through your AI adoption. So I thought it would be sensible to introduce LEGALFLY just very quickly for those of you that are new on the call and perhaps haven't seen LEGALFLY already. For those of you that have joined us for a couple of webinars now, you may recognize this slide. But I think the main takeaway from this is really how LEGALFLY has built an enterprise AI function. So our agents are built on top of your particular knowledge, which is then integrated into where your teams are already working. We've taken this approach because we realize that Gen AI is not necessarily the best for kind of legal decision making. General purpose tools might produce a confident sounding answer, but really during a pilot, they maybe struggle to deal with the issues that legal are actually tackling with that like relevant knowledge, and it's actually grounded in your internal standards that have already been defined, your preferred risk. By using the LEGALFLY agents, this is actually how we can bring about consistency across the documents and about how we have predictability in how risk is assessed. Without that in place, this is why I think a lot of teams or maybe projects stall, not because the AI is necessarily bad, but because it's not been focused in the right way. It's not been tailored to the organization. And this is the gap where the LEGALFLY agents are really designed to try and cross that bridge to enable teams moving from that pilot to a full rollout with confidence. I think though, we're going to have to start at the beginning as always, and this may be a little bit of a repeat for those of you that caught the initial webinar on actually running a successful pilot. And I'm sure Jeroen would agree with me, but reviewing a third-party contract against the standards set by your internal contract is by far one of the most common use cases we see. Why that is likely one of the most common is because it's often an individual doing this work. It's really high volume as well, and often follows kind of repeatable playbooks or standards. And even if that isn't set as a standard, it's a standard that you probably have in your head from those years of experience of kind of going through this process, understanding the needs of the business and the risk of the potential contract. But I think other use cases where we see these kind of start in pilots is standardized reporting for contractual assessments. So whether that's maybe for FIDIC, JCTs, NECs, even internal commercial alignment, by using playbook functionality, teams can actually set these standards really quickly to produce structured reports. We can also draft compliant contractual notices. Again, this is grounding back in the relevant contract, the drafting style, the tone. LEGALFLY can support with research with over 400 verified legal sources. It's a really great starting point, as well as supporting teams on, say, due diligence exercises, really focusing on kind of information extraction. Now, those are the use cases. And using different tools within LEGALFLY, whether that's our playbook functionality, our custom agents functionality, company knowledge, we can really ground each of these workflows into your playbooks, risk assessments, or even just previously negotiated documents. So where you might not have a playbook, but you have an agreement that you negotiated well, you can actually leverage the knowledge in that contract to begin grounding that AI. This then allows us to start getting those faster results. We can get those individual gains, but I think more importantly, we can deliver some early wins, which help gets everyone sort of bought in. But where I think we want to focus a little bit more on is kind of moving out of that initial stage of kind of just starting. And this journey here is a journey that I think over the last 2 years, I've walked along with the majority of our enterprise clients. So starting out, we've kind of already been through that a little bit. This is where we are starting at an individual level. We're maybe going through some AI basics, we're tackling that low-hanging fruit, and generally maybe observing some of the general productivity to be found with AI. And that's great at an individual level, but as teams now are starting to think beyond individual use of AI and actually how a team is going to implement AI, this is where the building standards phase becomes really, really important. So it becomes clear on a pilot the inconsistencies that can occur with AI. And that's, I think, the piece that we want to try and navigate. So teams start to think about how can we ensure that everyone in the team is operating off of best practices and standards. So using some of the tools that we've mentioned earlier, playbooks, kind of custom agents, we can actually ensure, always think about this in almost like restricting AI, ensure that it has clearly marked boundaries, it is grounded in company knowledge, it has your set standards. And I'm going to be honest, this process, this building, this standards, this is a little bit of back and forth where I work really closely with maybe 1 or 2 members of the team, and they will take ownership of this particular process. This allows us to go through the testing of the workflow, allows us to ensure that outputs are consistent and in line with company standards. Once we have that in place, we now have a centralized place for that workflow, whether that's a contract review, whether that's due diligence, whether that's drafting, and we now have ownership on both sides. This is important because you will have to maintain these standards as the law evolves, as risk changes, or as the business needs kind of change. But this is really, really fundamental for actually then rolling out across an entire organization. This sort of forms the implementation plan for the wider organization. Scaling. So as mentioned, once we've tested and validated the process, we've got those standards, and now we're thinking, okay, who else am I going to roll this out to? So you probably need at this point a little bit of structure in there. So what we've seen work well is we might take a group level kind of custom agent or playbook that is then paired with maybe a regional playbook. So maybe you have a team in the Middle East, maybe you have a team in the UK. There are going to be regional differences between how the law is applied and the level of risk that you're willing to take. And then you may have still those user level playbooks. By taking this approach, maybe the chief legal officer, just team lead, they may set the standard for the global playbook. This allows them to have control over all of the items, all of the risk, and then you have subdivisions under that for regional playbooks. Once this is in place and you now have these standards, I think this is where it then becomes really interesting about, okay, how are we really transforming the team here? So we know that there's advantages to be had at the individual level. We've set some standards for We've set standards to ensure the business is working with AI consistently, and now we're thinking about wider rolling out. And I think actually it becomes really important to integrate with where teams are already working. You might have seen on a previous slide there, and you've probably heard us talk about it before, but we have a really, really great partnership with Microsoft that's always getting more integrated and more interwoven. But you can already today find LegalFly in Microsoft Word, Copilot, we have SharePoint, and we're going to be showing you some of the new integrations that we've got looking at Teams, and even how to intake emails directly from Outlook. We're not just Microsoft though, we are also integrated with places like Slack and G Drive. And I think, Jeroen, it'd be good maybe just to get some insights maybe about what do you kind of see when you come in from the building standards phase to scaling across the whole organization? Are there any kind of common themes that you see from our customers?
Well, good question, Harry. I think it's mainly about being in control and staying compliant throughout the organization, and really having people that are taking the ownership and responsibility of certain standards and being able to provide certain aspects within LegalFly, such as you mentioned, a playbook that has been approved by the legal department, but then it's being used by people that are doing the contract review, for example.
No, I think that's you tapped into something really interesting there. And as I was going through these slides, it's like, like what do we need in place and what do we have all of that? And I was like, ultimately, we need another human on the other end to really help us set these standards for these AI agents and playbooks. And I think why we have these standards, right, is because so as more and more of the team begin to use AI, the theme that I think I'm going to keep coming back to, and I think underpins all of this, is consistency. So as with anything, you may have differing levels of kind of AI capabilities at a user level. And I think as everyone is aware at this point, that will naturally produce very, very different outcomes when working with AI. This could mean incredibly good results for one team member, but incredibly bad results for another when they're trying to work on the same workflow. So kind of one-shot prompting, so what you've seen probably in, say, like ChatGPT is fine for really quick tasks, maybe redraft this email, explain the termination provisions in this contract. But for complex legal flows, we need more detailed reasoning, that knowledge, and really to ground those kind of answers. The LegalFly agents put that structure in place, and so that everyone doesn't have to learn how to do this kind of prompting, to do these sort of more complex workflows. It's set once by the business. We set that standard within AI, almost a little bit like guardrails, and then it enables other teams to very, very quickly get the benefit of that work. Once we have done this, and we have these sort of standards in place, again, I think it becomes important to start thinking about how we're going to manage this moving forwards. So who owns that standard, who can edit the standard, and then who just uses the standards. Again, this enables teams to define them, set them once, and allow them to become repeatable. We might not want certain departments changing the legal playbook for kind of obvious reasons there. I don't know actually, Jeroen, whether you have kind of any examples of maybe common mistakes that you've seen teams kind of make at this stage where they're like, right, I want to get the whole team using AI.
Well, I think with any organization, you will always have people that are very enthusiastic to start off and try out all the functionalities, all the capabilities that we have within LegalFly. And some are a bit more, let's say, critical, which is good. I think it's definitely, it serves its purpose to be critical because you have your own legal background, of course. You're doing your own human and legal reasoning in that sense. But of course, it's let's say you get acquainted with how LegalFly is responding to your questions, and it builds trust over time. And I think that's definitely one of the things, as you mentioned, you have the safeguards, making sure that we come to a legal grounds answer. And I think that's kind of the outliers that we have within any organization, of course. And I think the way we can engage people is definitely get them involved as soon as possible within the process and get actually quick wins, making sure that they understand how they can use LegalFly in the day-to-day business and to really see, okay, what's the value? And I think as soon as people perceive the value, see the value, they will actually automatically use more of our functionalities of our platform.
No, exactly. I think it is really important, as you said, to kind of get that quick win, build that confidence, and then it's like now we can start looking at the more complex workflows and really bringing in those kind of other teams and departments. I think this slide kind of acts just as a bit of a nice summary between, say, maybe like two tracks where we see a successful implementation versus an unsuccessful implementation. So you can see at the top where we're having kind of inconsistent outputs. We haven't got that audit trail. We don't really know how teams are using AI in particular. By going through this process, as I think we've hopefully highlighted at this point, you can set those standards. You're going to get consistent outputs, but also as well with that, we're going to be able to mirror your organizational structure, which gives you clear overview and actually an audit trail. You can see who owns the playbook, who set the standard, who's using the playbook, when they're using it, and even how often they're using it, ensuring that governance you're putting in place is actually being followed. And I think both you and I have actually touched on this already. I think actually one thing that I think makes this scaling possible, and this is coming up more and more, I think, as enterprises recognize the potential impact for AI, is we do need someone on the other side that we can work with to give AI these standards, to work with materials that you have, to kind of test and validate these. Once you have that person, we can work with them. This is what we can bring in place to kind of scale up and roll out that playbook, that agent. As I said, this person on the other side may then be responsible for updating that, making sure it stays up to date with the law and kind of any other new requirements for the business. I think now it'd be good, Jeroen, just to understand a little bit about how leading teams really have driven the adoption here.
Yep, these are some great examples that from feedback that we've received from customers. Of course, it is about engaging with people, with the different teams, making sure that they see the value. And some of them really want to, okay, let's have a weekly check-in, let's have a fortnightly check-in of the onboarding session, making sure that people have the time to actually ask their questions, very hands-on as well, making sure that they get answered as soon as possible, so people are really feeling supported in that onboarding process. Some other examples that we see is, of course, sometimes they want to make it more of a playful thing. For example, BDO in the Netherlands, they really said, okay, we've got a team doing it without LEGALFLY and a team with LEGALFLY, and then see, okay, to what extent, not just time efficiency, but also in terms of compliance, how many things did they identify in terms of risk when they were doing a contract review, for example. And then, of course, it could always go even further, and that's one of our other customers, de Grote de Man. They actually had an internal competition. They could actually win, for example, an iPhone, bringing up use cases that are very repetitive and would have a great impact on the day-to-day business of their colleagues. And of course, some other customers, of course, have been discussing with us how we can actually show the value within the different teams, because it's one thing to have on an organizational level a check-in with people, but I think it's even more value whenever we engage with the different specific teams, because they have specific needs as well, so we can actually engage on those and making sure that they perceive the value as soon as possible.
Amazing, thank you for that. And I think that leads us nicely into the demo.
Correct. Let me share my screen. All right. There were some great things that you mentioned on your end, Harry, so I would actually go through them. One of the first things, of course, you will see we're now in the discovery agent within LEGALFLY. As you can see here, we also have some integrations, for example, SharePoint and Google Drive. Within SharePoint, you have, of course, the possibility to import documents into LEGALFLY, but also search through your SharePoint. That is being used of a protocol. It's called MCP, Model Context Protocol, which allows you to really go through the documentations that you have already on your SharePoint to make it really powerful to retrieve information and contracts, for example, that you already have within that environment. Additionally, we have other integrations. Either they are already live for our customers or coming very, very soon. Apart from the SharePoint, we also have the Google Drive, as well as Slack and Teams integration. I think it's great to showcase as well how LEGALFLY integrates really within these different solutions. So, for example, I can ask here, what is a mutual NDA, for example, pretty straightforward question. Then the answer is actually being sent to LEGALFLY, and then LEGALFLY will analyze the question and give back the answer. So you don't have to go outside of your own application. You can actually stay within that one that you're used to work with. So you have this information to have in that sense. Of course, we want to specify more specifically what it's regarding to, so you can actually interact with LEGALFLY instead of having to go to the online version. You actually can stay within Slack, within Teams to discuss this. Of course, you can also add in some documents. So, for example, here I can add in as well a document and ask here what are the 5 most crucial risks. And then the attachment as well will be sent to LEGALFLY. So then the analysis will be done, and then you will receive the answer straight away within Teams. Just like I'm showing here within Teams, it's also possible to do that within Slack, as I did already earlier. For example, here you will see a reply where you get the information of all the 5 most crucial risks and actually go through the information. Of course, sometimes you want to continue your work within LEGALFLY. It's easy, you just click on this link and you will be redirected to that conversation within LEGALFLY, as you're used to do so. Any of those interactions will be here as well within the open history, so you can see this one is coming from Slack and so on, so you can actually continue your work here if you want to. As you mentioned as well, we also have the integration within Outlook. So, for example, here I prepared an email. Imagine I received this email from someone to check this NDA. Instead of going to LEGALFLY and upload it there, or I could also use, of course, the Word add-in. But in this case, I just want to show you the functionality of the Outlook integration, which means we have an attachment and a question that I'm asking to LEGALFLY. Then I just need to click send, and then LEGALFLY will send back the information as a response to it. And as I indicated, everything that I'm doing send or interact with LEGALFLY will also appear here within our online environment. Then, in terms of the policies and getting your information or your governance in place, I definitely would highlight this. Then, for example, we go to the profile. Whenever you're an admin, you can also organize teams. And teams, you can actually here, for example, set up different teams, which allows you as well, whenever you are in review, multi-review, and so on, to really go through and share both individually or on a team level. Another point that you touched upon was in terms of metrics. Of course, it's one thing, of course, making sure that people perceive the value. Another thing is, of course, seeing the metrics, seeing the activity of the people, not just on an individual level, but also on a team's level. That's possible to do so. So, for example, here you could see a breakdown of the activities of the different agents, as well as the interactions within Word or online on a person level, and so on. So these are all things we can actually interact with, but as I mentioned, we can also do this on a team level as well. This is, of course, restricted to the admin themselves, because we also have some customers, for example, where it's not allowed to have or see that information because of a work council. And so we also have the possibility to actually disregard all the information on an individual level. So that would be also a possibility if needed for your organization, of course. Teams, you can add in here, you can create them and adjust them, of course. And then whenever you are, for example, here within a playbook, we can actually go to one of the playbooks that we have. And then you could also see here at the top, we have sharing capabilities. So again, I repeat myself, of course, but whatever you do within LEGALFLY is always your own personal environment. It's only whenever you decide to share that you can actually share that information with other people to go through it. So for example, here we also have possibility to share with people and so on to actually have that set. Then another point that I could actually showcase is, for example, let me see if I can do that, is that whenever we share something with people, it's also possible to actually see, for example, the history. So we have a playbook, I open a playbook, and then we can go to the version history, and then we can see what are the things that were changed upon interaction with it. So it's possible, for example, whenever I interact or collaborate with someone on a specific playbook, to actually see what are the changes that other person did, but also making sure that I can go back and revert the version to a previous version if for some reason the confidentiality was changed from 7 years to 5 years, but we kind of agree to actually keep it on 5 years. We can always revert back to a previous version of that one. I think that's kind of, in a nutshell, all the different things that we see within LEGALFLY, how we can actually make sure that LEGALFLY is a centralized way of working with. It's not just online and in Word, but it's really supporting throughout the applications that you're used to work with. So for example, within Teams, within Outlook, making sure you can actually continue your work, day-to-day work within those applications and removing the effort of engaging with LEGALFLY.
No, thank you very much, Jeroen, for taking us through that. I think it's really important, I think, to be where teams are already sort of existing and working. But I think as well, as we continue to build this out, I think this is where we get into the really interesting bit of really transforming the way that teams actually work with AI. So it's not just coming to it, click and use, it's actually integrated into the wider ecosystem. And I know there's going to be some exciting things coming up this year as we begin to connect all these different steps together and really, really begin to actually transform departments with multi-agent steps that are all connected up with workflows. But anyway, I kind of digress a little bit there. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us this far, and thank you, Jeroen, for going through that demonstration. We hope this has given you a bit of an insight as to, I guess, what's required at each stage of starting out with AI, building your initial standards, and what you should potentially look for in a vendor when you're thinking about rolling out to the wider team. What do you need to have in place as an organization? A dedicated owner on your side? Is the vendor integrated to where you're already kind of working? I think those are two of the really key elements that I've taken away as going through this webinar. If you did want to see any of this in a little bit more detail, you want to see this apply to your own specific workflows, your own kind of use cases, there is a QR code on screen to book a demo with us. We're always happy to talk through any real use cases, pilot designs, and you can also click on the QR code to follow us on LinkedIn. What I want to do now is just jump into a few questions that we have from the Q&A. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions coming through. Please, guys, if you do have any more questions, feel free to kind of submit them in the Q&A chat box within the webinar. Okay, so one question that we have got here is, can different teams or regions have their own playbooks, or is everything centralized? Jeroen, I don't know whether that's one that maybe you could show live very quickly again.
Yep, sure.
Because I think that actually this is something that we work on, as mentioned, when teams are happy with AI, we're validated, we've done that hard work of actually testing the use cases. If there is a playbook you can pull up.
Yep, sure.
then what we can,
So for example, this playbook.
yeah, exactly. And then if you head into the share option and see, yeah, exactly, here we go. This is a perfect one here. So we can see who owns this playbook. We can see that Chris is an editor and that Thomas has kind of view rights on this. So this could be a group level playbook that maybe the entire organization has access to, or maybe this is a very specific playbook that is then only used exactly for the engineering team here. Maybe that's the procurement team. And again, this keeps everything segregated. People aren't seeing playbooks that they don't have to see. They're only working on playbooks or using playbooks that are relevant to them. But also, I think importantly, it provides that kind of confidence in security. And maybe actually, Jeroen, this is a good question for you to answer, is what happens if someone edits the playbook?
Good that we're still in the playbooks then, so I'll just hit save. This is actually something that would be captured here in the version history. So imagine I'm the owner of the playbook. I share it with Chris, and then Chris, as I mentioned the example earlier, I see here within the version notes that Chris has updated the confidentiality duration, that it was previously between 3 and 5 years, and he changed it to 5 and 7. Either we would say, okay, this is great, I will go ahead and publish that version, or I can always go back to a previous version and restore this one. So I think that in that sense, you still you keep control over the playbooks throughout the usage within your organization.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that audit trail is something that's definitely becoming kind of more important as we are, very important in the UK. I know we're always big on audits and having that kind of traceability as well. So a nice kind of just additional bit of oversight there. We've had another question, I think is maybe quite a good one here as well, is can LegalFly draft contracts itself, and is it sufficiently compliant for that purpose? So LegalFly can, of course, we can draft contracts from scratch. However, I think as we have always said on these calls and webinars, context is always king with these kind of prompts and these kind of tasks. So you can ask it to draft you maybe a long-term lease agreement for a data center. And it will do so, and it will probably do a reasonably competent job at it. However, what's going to make that a little bit better is attaching maybe some jurisdictional knowledge, an existing either template or example that you already have, and giving it some modifications. This will just be true of even the frontier models that you might be working with. It's really, really important to give it a little more context, a little more information, so that it doesn't have to get too creative. As when it has to become too creative, this is where you may start to see kind of some more interesting clauses or drafts or proposals being suggested. But no, we have plenty of people using LegalFly to redraft, draft templates, addendums, appendixes, bulk modify agreements. All kinds of drafting workflows are happening. And I've got another one here, Jeroen, that maybe one that we could dive into just a little bit more, was just on the metrics. So they want to see how we can track user activity, and maybe what kind of information, like granularity, we could break that down. So I guess where the users are maybe operating the most.
All right. Makes sense. That is, as I showed earlier, under the admin panel. So whenever you are an admin within the organization, you can click your own name of a profile link at the bottom left, go to the admin panel, and then you will see the metrics right next to the users. Then you see the teams, and then you see the users. And you see here all the different active users. Of course, you can drill down to the specific teams. For example, here on the engineering team, it's possible, or the legal UK team. In that sense, we can change those select the teams, as well as also the range, the time range on usage, for example. So here we can see the active usage in general, for example, the amount of users, as well as the breakdown of activities. You can always increase to have a better view in that sense, and then you see all the information on a date basis, how it's broken down, the activity. Of course, you can also see these parts. You can toggle off and look into the most relevant ones that you want to look into. For example, how many reviews have been done, or what's the activity on discovery, for example. These are all things we are sharing with our customers. So on a daily basis, but could also on a weekly basis, and so on. Then additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we also have the usage breakdown between Word and our online platform. And this is also good to have a good understanding whenever we're doing the onboardings, and it's very clear that the Word add-in is critical to have a seamless integration and usage throughout the day-to-day workflow. Then this is great to actually kind of, push in a positive way to make sure that people are using the Word add-in, or it could help us to flag a potential issue to make sure that, okay, did some people were not able to download, for example, the Word add-in? How can we help them in this process? And additionally, we also have the top users by activity, for example. Then we see here the information on the different parts within LEGALFLY, on how many documents they have been using, on the reviews, for example, the multi-reviews, all the different agents that have been used by the specific people.
Awesome. No, thank you for kind of going through that. And I know that has become, I think, particularly when we are looking at expansion, right? Like teams need to know how much is being used and what we can kind of, the data that we can kind of extract to kind of say, no, well, look, this is what usage actually looks like across your teams and broken down.
Correct. And if I can add to that, it's, of course, as I mentioned before, we have the value and the metrics, and those are also a bit intertwined. What I mean by that, with some customers, we really go into how much time did we save, for example, on a review. Then it's easier for them to do an ROI calculation on that sense. Also interactions on legal research with discovery, these interactions could also mean a potential time savings. This allows really to also help with that business case sometimes that is needed internally to also engage with other teams.
No, it's a really good point. Thank you for adding that. We had a couple of the questions just drop in on the chat that are nice and quick ones. So how is LEGALFLY integrated into Word and similarly into Teams? So Word, we have a native add-in. You just download us from the add-in store and you sign in with your LEGALFLY account. And LEGALFLY within Teams is a bot that you can chat to. You can send it documents, ask questions, initiate queries that you can then resume on the platform as well, providing that kind of seamless experience. So even if you lose that Teams chat, you have a record online. I've got one as well. This is an interesting one here. It's how should LEGALFLY not be used? And I don't know if you have any examples of this, Jeroen, as well. I have one off the top of my head right now that I think if they wanted to come to me and say, you know, this is our core use case, it might be a little bit tricky to get some good results out on that one. But for me, I think LEGALFLY should not be used for kind of litigation, complex court and legal case analysis. The reason being is that that's not where we've necessarily focused all of our knowledge. We are starting to build out some of our knowledge around this with some of our partners, such as From Counsel and a few others to be announced soon. But at the moment, I would say that we sort of lack a little bit in terms of case knowledge there. Now, for some of our teams, we can build custom knowledge sets. So that is something that we might be able to sort of work around if you have a specific set of cases that you work with. But I don't know whether you have anything that you would advise against doing in LEGALFLY today.
Well, I would say with any tool, not use it blindfoldly. So it's still, of course, the human reasoning, the legal reasoning that we still need from our end to make sure that whatever input we give to the AI, we get some output and to be really conscious of how to use it. And I think that's also a process that you would need to gain confidence over time. I think you would see, okay, we have the LEGALFLY playbooks out of the box. Of course, we always help with the custom playbooks and your own organization's playbooks to leverage those. And I think people will then start using it more often within Word, for example, making sure that these redrafts are inserted. But I see also with customers that actually these are all different steps. Then they do the next step would be actually apply all, for example. That LEGALFLY will start doing the full review of the document and insert all the track changes or comments, whatever you like most, within that document so you can review that document, the new version of it. I think those are different steps that you see to build confidence over time.
No, definitely. Nice quick one we can answer here as well. So do we offer a tool that allows us to create an internal chat interface using answers and content that has been prepared by the customer? So this is definitely something, again, that we see teams want to build out, particularly when they start thinking about, okay, how can we handle all of the incoming questions from other team members? So yes, we can absolutely build a almost like a chat interface. We actually have one internally at LEGALFLY for new hires, where it contains our product information, a little bit of context about the company, and it allows them to come in and start asking some of those questions that they might have. So we could absolutely build one of these based off your kind of precedent, common questions. This has dual effect, I find. So not only does it free up time in, say, maybe the legal person's day, where they're not responding to these sort of ad hoc questions around contracts or general legal risk, but it also means that the person that submitted that question isn't waiting for that answer. They're not having to chase legal up because they're elbow deep in a massive contract renewal. They can actually come in and access the chat interface and get those initial kind of questions asked. I think actually this also speaks, I think, to something very, very new, very exclusive actually, and only really being trialed by a select few accounts and for our VIP enterprises. But we have just started to work out or using light users. So maybe where you just want the entire business to have only access to this chatbot, or maybe just access to one feature that is controlled by legal, we can now facilitate that as well. So we know that some teams are looking at using LEGALFLY in place of Copilot because they can have this light user sort of functionality. But that is all very, very cutting edge stuff that we're doing over here. But yes, in answer to that question, in short, we can create an internal chatbot based on your knowledge for the wider businesses. And then actually maybe linked nicely to that one, something that I can answer as I've worked on it recently. So as AI moves from legal team to other business teams like procurement or clients, like how do we manage that transition? So in the event where maybe procurement or compliance are still reporting to legal, this is where I think, as Jeroen has demonstrated, we could establish a playbook that is built and owned by legal. So they've set the standards, they've put the risk tolerances in, and maybe an easy one here is payment terms, where you're happy with 30 days, 45 is acceptable, but 90 days after month end, non-negotiable, not doing it, not for the business cash flow. Legal can set that standard. Maybe there's one person in procurement that can edit it, and the rest of the procurement team can just use that, safe in the knowledge that actually this aligns with the business, this aligns with their needs, and these standards have been set. So again, just kind of having that centralized control, standard set, and rolled out to the wider teams. Okay, and then, and Jeroen, I think maybe this one would be a good question for you to take. So we've just been asked, what's the best way to handle internal resistance from team members who are skeptical about legal AI?
Good question. I actually like those people because they're just being critical. And I think that allows us to really drill down to what is actually the thing that they are, well, either afraid of or that they want to clarify in a better way. And I think this is also related to what I said before. It's a step-by-step building confidence over time. And what I really like, it's also in previous roles that I've had at other companies, it's rather in terms of the change management. That's still an aspect because we're still human. And so in that sense, I like to have different kind of people, people that are trailblazers as well as, or front runners, as well as people that are more critical, more skeptical. And I think that a kind of mix of people really helps to drill down, having a good balance act of and setting the standard of, okay, these are the most critical use cases that we can trust and build upon, as well as having a better insight on or an outlook what we do next altogether. So whenever we face that resistance, I think it's really about having an open conversation and not over-promising and under-delivering. It's rather in terms of making sure, okay, this is what we can do, this is what we'll be able to do, and take it step by step over time.
Yeah, no, I think I do agree with you. It's almost the you're almost kind of grateful for the skeptical in the room sometimes, just to kind of, as I said, really dig in and make sure that actually this is being done properly, and to get those early wins and get that buy-in. Guys, I want to say thank you very, very much. We've still got a few questions that we will have to follow up with. But again, thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. I hope you found that valuable. You maybe picked up some tips and tricks if you are thinking about rolling out AI. As always, if you want to chat about any of this in detail, please do reach out. We're always happy to discuss anything AI related. But no, have a wonderful afternoon. It's been a pleasure. And thank you very much, Jeroen, as well.
Pleasure.